to you criticize. Well, I said, get on away from me. You're trying to bring me down. You're trying to bring me down. I said, get on.
Well, here we go again. Good day, my name is Paul, and this is my slain review of Brian Flemmings, The God Who Wasn't There. Nope, when I was about to sit down and watch this movie, I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, you watch all the promos and all the hype. I was expecting to, after I watched this movie, to throw my Bible away, join the Blasphemy Challenge, and become a hardcore evolution atheist. It's quite obvious that Flemming put a lot more effort into the advertising campaign that he did into the video. And if Flemming would have actually researched most of his stuff rather than just drawing preconceived conclusions and then heading out and looking for people that would agree with him, he probably would have been turned back to Christianity. There's not enough time in a 10-minute video to address all of the problems that I saw with this movie, all of the historical inaccuracies and blatant misconceptions. So this would be the first of two short videos that I'll make, touching on 3 or 4 things in the movie. I saw a movie that was long on opinion and short on facts to back up those opinions. A lot of opinion backed up by other people's opinion. I zipped over to tectonics.org, where JP Holding was talking about this movie. He put it this way. He said the movie was about 20% a documentary on Herodotus and G.A. Wells material, 20% pagan copycat stuff like the famous 16 crucified saviors list, 20% objecting to the religious right in the U.S., 10% objecting to Mel Gibson's The Passion movie, and 30% or more of Flemming's personal problems, offering temper tantrums towards his prior fundamentalist upbringing. We're going to talk about Flemming in just a little while. I was somewhat surprised, really, when I started watching this movie. I expected it to be a little more scholarly, a little more professionally done. Instead, we got just cheesy graphics and Monty Python type cartoons bouncing across the screen, along with Flemming's catchphrases and chosen adjectives to paint a picture of skepticism towards Christianity. I mean, you could clearly see that this was a personal thing for Flemming, not just making a movie to expose Christianity and Christians as the cause of every ill in society. And a couple of things that really registered on the absurd meter for me, I'm going to touch on right now. One of them was Flemming's statement close to the beginning of the movie. It says, "Why is it that Christians can be so specific about the life of Christ, but they're so vague about what happened after he left? Aren't Christian leaders telling them the story?" And then regarding the Gospels, he says, "The other 3 are clearly derived from Mark. Mark mentions the destruction of the Jewish temple, which happened around the year 70 AD. So the Gospels all came later than that, probably much later. There's a gap of 4 decades or more. Most of what we know about this period comes from a man who says he saw Jesus Christ come to him in a vision. He was the Apostle Paul, formerly known as Saul of Tarsus." Fleming makes the statement about Christians not being so specific about the life of Christ with regards to he's standing outside, and I think he was standing outside of a Billy Graham crusade or whatever, and catching these Christians and asking them questions about Christianity and their faith. And then he fires some philosophical, mythical names at them from history and asks them if they've ever heard of these people, etc. And as if the average Joe on the street is supposed to know ancient history. But then later on, when he wants someone to back up his side of the story, who does he go to? He goes to people who have been written books and been propagating Jesus myth theories for years, like Brian Flemming and Richard Carrier, Robert Price. Why doesn't he go and talk to people like J.P. Holding or Lee Strobel, or maybe quote some of F.F. Bruce's works? Because he knows that these guys would just bury and have in their writings just buried the Jesus myth theories in writings and debates. Also, I've heard this argument a lot of times that that Matthew and the rest of it got Matthew, Luke, and John were derived from Mark. And a lot of it, they say, well, just look at it, the Gospels are so similar, they must have all been derived from the same one. Yeah, because they were all talking about the same occurrence. Of course, they're going to have the same stuff in it. And you look at it the other way, if they weren't the same, then people will say, oh, look, they're contradictions, they're not the same, they're not talking about the same guy. You can't win with that argument. Can't have it both ways. But as you read the Gospels, I mean, it's clearly that there's just so much information within the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, which isn't even accounted for by the Gospel of Mark. Then he makes the big deal about there being at least 4 decades between, the earliest Gospels and when Jesus actually died. Again, he makes this statement out of total ignorance, and I'm sure even if he asked people like Price and those guys that he interviewed the significance of this, he probably wouldn't have even used this as an argument. As I talked about in my other video, the consistency and accuracy of the Bible compared to other writings from history, compared to some famous writings of history in which there is a time gap of hundreds of years between when something happened and when it was finally written down, or between the oldest documents that we have and when something was written, when something happened. Compared to the Bible, when we've got, he says 40 years, and again, that's debatable, that it could even be less. And in my video, I show how historians measure that by the amount of documents that we have and the oldest document that we have compared to when something happened. And they give the Bible a percent rating of about 97 to 99% accuracy, compared to some writings about famous names like Caesar and Alexander the Great that hardly register on the percentage accuracy chart. So Flemming actually does the Bible a favor there by pointing out that there is like 4 decades, just 40 years between when Jesus died and the Gospels were written down. As I said before in my other video, anybody who would actually claim that Jesus Christ, that there's no historical evidence for Jesus Christ outside of the Bible, are just totally dumb, blind, ignorant of what history actually says. Again, Flemming, concerning Mark, makes the comment that Mark mentions the fall of the Jerusalem temple by the Romans in 70 AD. The only reference in the Gospel of Mark to the temple is when he was talking about in this verse. He said, "Then Jesus went out of the temple, and one of his disciples said to him, 'Teacher, see the manner of stones and the workmanship that are in this building.' Jesus answered and said to him, 'Do you see this great building? Well, not one stone shall be left on top of another that shall not be thrown down.'" This is in Mark 13:1-3. That's the only reference in Mark to the temple being destroyed. And here what this is Jesus is making a prophecy concerning the fall of the temple. And when the Roman wars with the Jews started 70 AD, that temple was totally, stone by stone, brick by brick, dismantled and destroyed by the Romans. So once again, O'Brien is either misinformed concerning the scriptures, or maybe you should read Mark again, or being intentionally misleading here. And so, given then the fact that Mark or any of the other Gospels do not mention the war between Romans and Israel that broke out around 70 AD, is great testimony to their original writings being even earlier than 70 AD. So once again, Mr. Flemming helps our cause as Christians and the Bible here instead of his original intent, which was to debunk it. And then there's a silly statement based on Earl Daugherty's work, I believe it was, that Paul never actually believed in an actual physical Christ, but that he was just some mystical spirit out there that Paul was worshiping or whatever. Even though Paul refers to Jesus as an actual person, the Son of God that came and died on the cross, even in verses such as Galatians, when he makes reference to James, the brother of Jesus, etc. But these guys, Flemming, as well as these other guys that he listed here, the Jesus Myth proprietors, they have got a lot of opposition. I'm just not talking religious opposition. And like I said before, anybody who knows, any historian in colleges, universities, museums, and libraries all over the world know the validity of Jesus Christ as a person of history, and that's outside of religious writings. Now, the movie's blatant misrepresentation of Justin Martyr's and Flavius Josephus' mention of Jesus are other subjects that can be touched on. But if you don't want to include those as great historical evidence for Jesus Christ outside of the Bible, I have at least 9 more major writings, again, and I'll list some of them in my other video. So if Flemming wants to go through all of history and denounce every single writer, then he's got his work cut out for him. And again, he'll have a lot of historians that will not agree with him. I have run out of time on this video, so I'm going to make a short second video in which I want to talk about 2 more subjects. I want to talk about Brian Flemming himself and I want to talk about the famous crucified saviors list that he throws up there on the screen. It's going to be fun. Catch you on the second video.